Welcome into Scoop and Score. My name's Tanner. Today I'm going to be breaking down my Week 12 Top 25 power ratings. And just for clarification, this is a power rating. This is not an AP poll or a playoff style ranking. Wins and losses and results on the field only matter to the extent that they change your statistical profile. So the only purpose of this poll is to tell you, according to my model, who would be favored on a neutral field if the game was to be played tomorrow. Anyway, with that out of the way, if you could like the video and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy it, I would greatly appreciate that. I'm trying to grow the channel here. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into my power ratings here. Starting with number 25, I have Oregon State. This is their first appearance in my power ratings. I know they've been floating right around the 20 to 25 mark in a lot of other power ratings I kept an eye on. But this is their first appearance in my power ratings coming up from being unranked. The past couple weeks they've been hovering right around that 25 to 30 range for most of the season, but this week they crack into the top 25. At number 24, I have Tulane. They're down 2 spots from last week. At 23, I have Cincinnati. They're down 3 spots from last week. At 22, making their first appearance into the poll, is UCF. They were unranked last week. I know for a fact they were 26 last week because they missed the poll by about 100th of a point to Illinois, who I think was 25 last week. Illinois or Kansas State. Anyway, at 21, I have Notre Dame. They're up 2 spots. At 20, I have Liberty. They're down 2 spots. I kind of expected Liberty to fall because they just had a terrible loss to UConn. But again, this is the power rating. It's looking at their entire statistical profile for the entire season. And Liberty is a lot better team than people want to give them credit for. At 19, I have Wake Forest. They're down 2 spots as well. At 18, I have North Carolina. North Carolina is up 1 spot. They made the jump over Wake after they beat them on the field. Question for you guys. Do you think North Carolina is still in the playoff race? Because I personally think North Carolina, if they went out, could potentially jump all the way from 13 into the top 4 in the playoff rankings. And we'll get into my thoughts on the playoff rankings once we get through the top 25 here. But anyway, to continue, at 17, I have Ole Miss. They're down a spot. At 16, we have the most controversial team in the poll, down 7 spots, is Texas at 16. Again, even with the 4 losses, Texas is still favored over all these teams below them, and the model hit them harder than I expected, considering it's kept them in the top 10 all season. So that performance against TCU hurt Texas pretty bad. They're all the way down to 16. So anyway, at 15, I have LSU. They're down a spot from last week after a really bad performance against Arkansas. I say really bad, but that's actually what Vegas expected if you look at the line on that game. At 14, I have Florida State making a massive jump, up 7 spots. Florida State, if you go look, has been playing some of the best football in the country in the past couple weeks. After they took those 3 losses, which again, that's to the 3 best teams they've played, so that should say something to you. But Florida State's been playing really good football over the past couple weeks, and the model's reflecting that. At 13, I have Washington. They're up 2 spots. At 12, I have Clemson. They stayed even. At 11, I have Penn State up 2 spots. They're slowly trying to make a creep back into the top 10, and that's looking like a really good win for both Ohio State and Michigan. Penn State, I think, gets hit too hard for those 2 losses. You could argue those are the 2 best losses in the country for any of the 2 lost teams. So anyway, let's move into the top 10 here. At 10, I have Utah. They're up a spot. At 9, I have USC. They're up a spot. At 8, I have UCLA. They stayed equal even after that bad loss to Arizona. At 7, I have Oregon. They stayed equal as well even after losing to Washington. The fact of the matter is the model thinks that both those teams played pretty decent games even though they lost. So it didn't move them. I do think it's interesting that all 4 of the Pac-12 contenders are all right next to each other in the rankings. The model sees all 4 of those teams within about a point of each other, maybe 2 points. And then I also think it's interesting that UCLA is still ahead of USC. So that'll shake out this weekend. We'll see. Stay tuned for a preview on that game probably tomorrow. Anyway, to keep moving along here, at 6, I have TCU. And then to get into the top 5, I have Tennessee at 5, up a spot. Tennessee and TCU flip-flopped. I like Tennessee's performance better than TCU's performance over Texas. At 4, I have Alabama. There's another controversial team. And the simple fact of the matter is that on a neutral field tomorrow, Alabama would be favored over everybody below them. And I think Vegas would back that number up as well. And then the top 3 also remain unchanged and mirror the playoff rankings exactly. So at 3, I got Michigan. At 2, I got Ohio State. And at number 1, I have Georgia. So before we get into the playoff rankings and my thoughts on the playoff rankings, I wanted to talk a little bit about the gaps between the teams here. So Georgia is a half-point favorite over Ohio State on a neutral field tomorrow. They're a 1-point favorite over Michigan, which should tell you a little bit. Ohio State and Michigan are about a half-point difference. So that's going to be a really good game next week. Georgia's about a 3.5-point favorite over Bama. They're a 9-point favorite over Tennessee. Georgia's an 18-point favorite over Oregon State, so there's an 18-point gap from team number 1 to team number 25 in my poll. And then one thing that I think is interesting here is Georgia's a 14.5-point favorite according to my model over LSU. So take what you will with that number. If you think that number's too high, go ahead and bet LSU. I wouldn't recommend it though. I think that number's about right personally. So anyway, that's my model and power rankings and my gaps between the teams. Let's go ahead and get into the playoff rankings here. I'll go ahead and just read through them and give my brief thoughts on teams that I think are too high, teams that I think are too low, teams that I think are still in it, but then no one's talking about. So anyway, let's go ahead and go straight through it. I'm only going to go through 20, not the full top 25. So number 1 is Georgia. Number 2 is Ohio State. Number 3 is Michigan, same as my model. Number 4 is TCU. Number 5 is Tennessee. Number 6 is LSU. 7 USC. 8 Alabama. 9 Clemson. 10 Utah. 11 Penn State. 12 Oregon. 13 North Carolina. 14 Ole Miss. 15 Kansas State. 16 UCLA. 17 Washington. 18 Notre Dame. 19 Florida State. And 20 Central Florida. Again, those are the playoff rankings for this week, week 12. One team that I think is way too high, and I know I'm going to get some hate for this, but I think LSU is way too high. Again, they're more around 15 in my model, and I think that's more appropriate. They do have a good win over Bama, but again, how good is that win over Bama, a 2-loss Bama now? That could easily be a 3-loss Bama. And I do think Bama's a really good team. I think they're the 4th best team. I agree with my model on Bama. I think they would probably beat a lot of the teams ranked below them, and even some of the teams ranked ahead of them in the playoff rankings. But again, you beat them by a 2-point conversion at home. I just think LSU's too high. They got beat by 30 at home against Tennessee, and Tennessee is one of the better offenses in the country. But again, I just think LSU's too high. I'm probably going to show my Big Ten bias here a little bit, but I think Penn State is probably the best 2-loss team. They don't have the win that that LSU has over Alabama, but I think they're just overall a better team. I think they're pretty comparable defense to LSU, and I think they have a slightly better offense. I would favor Penn State over LSU on a neutral field, but just by a couple points. But I think Penn State personally is the best 2-loss team. And then one team that nobody is talking about, and I mean nobody, and I briefly mentioned this when I was going over my power ratings, is North Carolina at 13. They're 18 in my power rating. So my power ratings are just power ratings. They don't necessarily matter when it comes down to the playoff rankings. But are we really going to leave one-loss North Carolina out of the playoff when their only loss is to a pretty good Notre Dame team, a Notre Dame team that's also going to finish probably in the top 20? North Carolina, if they win out, would have wins over probably a ranked NC State team, if not a very good NC State team. Not very good, but a quality NC State team. They would have a win over a quality Wake Forest team who will probably finish ranked, and then they'd obviously have a win over Clemson in the ACC title game. And those are 3 really, really good wins in my opinion. I wouldn't say the 3 best wins anybody would have, but I just don't see, if they win all of those games and they beat Clemson and they're sitting at 12-1, how you don't put them in the playoff. I'm not arguing they're one of the 4 best teams or necessarily should have a ton of hype to get into the playoff, but absolutely nobody's talking about North Carolina. And I think if things play out and they win out, they certainly are going to be in that conversation in a couple weeks. So keep an eye on them, is all I'm saying. But anyway, that's my thoughts on both the playoff rankings and my top 25 power ratings. If you enjoyed the video, again, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave me a like and subscribe to the channel. I'm trying to grow a nice little community here where we can all talk about college football, talk about betting lines, talk about all things college football related. That's going to do it for today's video though, guys. I greatly appreciate you watching. Stay tuned for tomorrow. I'm going to be putting out a USC versus UCLA preview. So stay tuned for that. But that's going to do it for me today, guys. Peace.